Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. As the Ukraine war continues, the business of farming continues in the Ukraine wherever it can. However, the consequences will be lower production, and this will be felt across the world for many years. Farmers across the rest of the world will continue to produce food and try to bridge this production gap. Eastern Europe continues to be a powerhouse for grain production and a major export for the rest of the world, and especially into Northern Africa. We'll return to Romania in the podcast to chat to Jim McCarthy about how the conflict is affecting his business and also how his crops are looking in the run into harvest. If you remember, the last time we spoke to Jim, he was helping refugees fleeing from the conflict and housing people both in the short and the long term. Jim, you're very welcome back to the podcast. Jim, the last time we spoke, you were putting in a huge effort into helping people at the border and also housing people both in the short and long term. How are your efforts going at the moment helping people fleeing from the conflict?
Credit where credit is due. The Romanian government did a wonderful job. The present Prime Minister of Romania is actually an ex-army officer, and he was the only non-American to lead the American troops in Afghanistan. And he's a very capable guy and a brilliant organizer. And you know, the days after I was speaking to you, the state really kicked in here. And at our border crossing in Siret, they put in a small city, a tent city, for food, reception, where people could rest, beds, and they speeded up the whole process of crossing the border and moving people on. And so people like us, our contribution was greatly reduced from then on. We still have our people who have hearing difficulties and that with us, but slowly they're leaving us. For instance, 6 of them are going early next week to the hearing society in Switzerland are taking 6 of them. They've got accommodation and jobs in Switzerland. And again, it's in a supported situation. And 3 more of them look like they're getting a job here in Badashan in town. So, you know, that's reducing down. So it's good, you know. The flow of people has really reduced greatly. We don't have a number. In fact, if anything, there's people going back to Western Ukraine more and more. But like now with the offensive and these days in the east, I think we could see more coming back again and going, you know, because it is really ramping up in the east. It's really ramping up in the east.
And in terms, Jim, of I suppose you're not obviously not far away from the border. Are there lots of Ukrainians locally who are thinking about going back, but are going to stop fairly close to the border and go back in when they can?
Yes, there are quite a few, but there's a lot of people have gone back. A lot of people have gone to jobs in Northern and Western Europe, have moved out here because we're only 50 kilometers here where I'm sitting now in my office to the Moldova border, and the eastern part of Moldova. It looks like the Russians are going to invade that as well, Transnistria, where the Russians already have an enclave. And have soldiers there already. So people are just a bit nervous, having been through what they've been through, they want to move a bit further away from it.
Sure.
Not that many people are settled in this area.
Yeah. Okay. They need to get a little bit further away, as you say, maybe.
Yeah.
And we talked before then, just as regards talking about moving. You said that there was maybe a start, I suppose, of maybe a little bit of Ukrainian grain moving across the border into Romania and back out to ports. Is that happening at all to any significant?
It is, Michael. There is a bit, but not a huge amount. Quite a bit going into Europe, but it's only opening up now because the Ukrainians have, rightly so, have been very concerned up to now about how much would be seeded and what would be seeded. So the exports were banned, but they're freeing it up a bit now. The problem of the Ukrainian grain going through Constanta, and it's fine for now until harvest, is that because Romanian agriculture is developing so quickly, the yields are ramping up each year, and a lot of the time Constanta is flooded with Romanian grain and grain that's coming down the Danube in barges from the likes of Hungary and places like that as well. So already at times of the year, Constanta was very stretched. Now it's okay now at the moment because for instance, we're cleaned out of grain, and most people are now cleaned out because the demand is just such that away we go.
And just to remind everyone, Constanta is a port on the Black Sea.
on the Black Sea. It's the most, in Romania, it's the most southerly port. It's a port in the Black Sea. It's very much in the south of the Black Sea. There's only places like Varna in northern Bulgaria, south of it on the Black Sea.
Okay.
So the
It's
other
important.
port. So it's
An
a very,
important
a very important port. And there's quite a bit of competition between Constanta and Rotterdam, because ships coming from Asia coming into Constanta, save a huge amount of journey. It's not that far from the Suez Canal up into Constanta, and then going by barge up the Danube or by trucking, but a lot of stuff going up by barge up the Danube. And so the Dutch aren't that excited about Constanta.
Okay. Competition's a great thing and a terrible thing, I suppose. It depends which side of the fence you're on.
Absolutely.
Speaking of, you mentioned there the Ukrainian plantings. Have you heard anything about that? How are they getting on, or is there much done?
It's two stories. In the occupied areas, there's literally nothing happening, and in the occupied areas by Russia, it's very unpleasant. And you for instance, just 2 days ago, a city in Siberia, Krasnogarash, they voted at their parliament meeting, at their ministerial meeting, that they would commandeer all the grain out of Kherson, because there's huge parts of Russia because very short of vegetables and grain, and so it's state robbery. And stealing food from an occupied area, Michael, is a war crime, believe it or not. That's what they're doing. And they're destroying
would you have an idea about what size of the grain production would be involved in that, where there's really nothing happening in comparison to the normal planted area?
10-15% of the Ukraine affected this way. But the other thing that's happening, Michael, in the remaining part of Ukraine, the general belief is that about 70% will be seeded. The maybe 80%, but then they've had enough fuel for seeding. They're okay for seed. Some inputs not okay. But the major concern now is diesel.
Okay.
Because 60% of Ukraine's diesel came from Russia or Belarus, which will not now be happening. 15% they produced themselves. That's all going to the war effort, and the rest came from Western Europe. And like one of the estimates for the unoccupied areas, a friend of mine did, was that they would need that, because the Russians are bombing the train infrastructure and the oil depots, they're destroying the infrastructure everywhere. They know now they can't take Ukraine, so they're just going to destroy it instead. And they're destroying the infrastructure. And the guys, they reckon now in the unoccupied areas that they need about 25,000 truckloads of diesel, Arctic trucks of diesel, to do the harvest. And the logistics around that is staggering, Michael, if you think about that. So and think of this, Michael, that wheat harvest in southern Ukraine will start at the start of July.
Yeah, it's really not that far away, I suppose.
And the other thing as well, Michael, that the rotation is changing. Everybody has cut back greatly on corn because of the tons that have to be shifted. Like a few of the people I'm in contact with have reintroduced soybean. They've held the sunflower hectares. They've introduced spring barley, malting barley, and some spring wheat. And they have halved their beet hectares because, again, the worries about having it processed is a big issue.
So I suppose whichever way it goes, there's going to be an awful lot less tons coming out of the country, even if.
Well, I think grain maize will be the big one, because there were big exporters of grain maize, and that is definitely that. And the other thing is, Michael, in Ukraine and here, we have beautiful maize crops. They really are beautiful, but we don't have a big water reserve, and because we don't have that reserve, we need good summer rainfall to produce a reasonably good harvest. And we have nothing to spare now in the tank at the moment, and that goes right through all southern Ukraine. It's been very, very dry. So in the ideal world, you need 600 millimeters of rain to grow a really good corn crop. The average rainfall from May, June, July, and August is about 300 millimeters. We need 600 millimeters for a really good crop, a really bumper crop of corn. And so we have nothing in the tank. So, at best, it'll be an average corn crop. So there's going to be feed wheat prices and maize prices will be very strong because, the production won't be there.
Yeah. And just a final word maybe on the Ukraine. Did you hear much at all? There's certainly bits and pieces that you see kind of coming across this side of the world about, looting, and I know you talked about looting of grain, but machinery and infrastructure being destroyed. Is that very significant?
Huge. I mean, Michael, not only are they taking that, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole new silo complex in one town in the occupied area, built in 2020. They just bombed it out because they looted everything and they just bombed it out because they can't hold it. They know they won't hold it. And so the stealing of machinery. I mean, Michael, these guys are even stripping out nice houses, stripping the stuff out and moving it up to Belarus to move it home after the war.
Oh, Jesus, right.
They're even stripping out houses, Michael, As one old man said to me recently, who lived through the Second World War, he said, when the Germans came, the Germans first, he said, the Germans, yes, took our livestock, he said, but they took the fat pigs and any fat cattle or anything, but they didn't kill the breeding stock. The Russians took everything. They just took everything. I mean, Romania had an enormous famine in 1946 after the Second World War because everything was taken. Literally everything was taken. And if they didn't take it, they killed it.
Right. Right.
So, and it's the same is happening again. Sadly, history repeats itself.
It is very disturbing stuff.
Yeah.
Really.
No, it is the farmers in the east of Ukraine, this is devastating.
Yeah.
This is absolutely devastating. This is just beyond belief. Like they're now in Luhansk, it's called LPR now, Luhansk People's Republic. It's run by a puppet Russian government. They're now demanding the farmers to start seeding, and they're telling them, we will give you fuel and we will give you seed if you don't have it. And they're kind of saying, and we will pay you something for the crop. And if you don't want to do this, we'll put you in jail.
It gets worse and worse, so it does. Crikey.
Oh, absolutely. Michael, people just don't realize it, Yeah. So any sympathizers who want to sympathize with Mr. Putin or anything else really want to spend the month in the occupied territories of Russia or of Ukraine to know what the Russians are really like.
So, we might maybe move back to your own farm to see whether there's any good news there, because there's certainly not one screed of good news at all connected to Ukraine, and certainly our hearts will go out to everybody who's involved or caught up in it in any way at all. Maybe back in your own farm, Jim, how are your own crops, I suppose? Have you got everything in the ground, and are they all looking well?
We got a beautiful spring weather for seeding. We really got a great. We got the beets seeded in the 5 days in kind of 26, 7, 8 March, and we probably have the most uniform emergence of sugar beet we've ever had. We seem to have 100,000 plants per hectare, 40,000 acre everywhere, and it's making great progress. And the weather has really suited it because we haven't had too much wind. We can get harsh weather in mid-April, late April very often, when the beet will be emerging. We haven't had this yet, so the beet is really motoring on and looking very well. And then, unlike most people, we then see our soybean, and we started when we just over 5 degrees soil temperature at the start of April. We seeded the soybean. We have 1,900 hectares of conventional soybean and 500 hectares of organic soybean, and that's all emerged now, and it's looking really well. And then we went on to the corn, and we were able to seed, because of having large seeders. In 14 days, we seeded 4,500 hectares of grain maize.
Wow.
And what was really lovely for the lads this year, being an Orthodox country, the Orthodox Easter is a week after the Easter you and I are familiar with. We were actually able to close down for Easter, and then after Easter we started seeding the sunflowers, and that was great. And we're just tidying up bits and pieces sunflowers now, and the first of sunflowers have emerged because they emerge very quickly. They're very vibrant and very active growers.
Okay, and maybe you might just stick with the sunflowers there for a second as you're talking about them, because I know you mentioned the last time around that you had forward sold some sunflowers at an incredible price. It's probably gone up since, I don't know, but you were considering planting more sunflowers this year than maybe you normally would have done. Did that happen?
Yeah, we've upped the sunflower hectares, and there's we continuously have new land coming in. That's all gone to sunflowers. We had to reseed a few pieces of rape land. That's gone to sunflowers. We reduced down second corns a bit, and that's gone to sunflowers. So, we have about 2,500 hectares of sunflowers, and again, because they don't require a lot of fertilizer, Michael. At present prices, a 3-ton crop of sunflowers is enormously profitable. And basically, you need to apply very little P&K to get that yield. Very, very, like if you remove with your crop of sunflowers, 3-ton crop of sunflowers from the field, you remove 80 kilos of N. Now, if you take into account for each 1% organic matter you have, you'll get 22 kilos of N free. Then you have to apply very little nitrogen. I think the sunflower's biggest enemy is big fertility, because you'll get early diseases. It's a scavenging crop. It likes to fend for itself. And I have inquiries from people in Ireland wanting to grow sunflower. I think actually people should look a lot more seriously at growing soybean in Ireland. I think there's a good opening for it, particularly in the southern half of the country, because I think you can seed it a lot earlier than the pieces that were seeded. It will take a bit more hardship maybe than people realize. But the sunflowers, Michael, if you've got some light land facing south, very little fertility, and there's quite a variation in the days to maturity. Syngenta have a huge breeding program in Europe. They have a fantastic facility outside Seville, because Seville gets 3,000 hours sunshine a year. So they're breeding all the time around in glass houses there. And
Jim, just on the varieties part of it, is there varieties that are specifically suited to your latitude, I suppose, and climate that you have there, maybe in comparison to something might be maybe a bit further north, maybe to you or south to you?
Exactly, and Michael, like wheat, they have better resistance. Like if you're going to go, for instance, a German friend of mine now, who 5 years ago wouldn't even consider growing sunflowers, is putting in 250 hectares not far from Berlin. Okay. And it's moving north because of that. And as you move north, you just need better disease resistance,
Okay.
Sclerotinia and then botrytis and that. And we will spray once for disease. Most farmers here will not spray for disease. And the big thing is like growing wheat at home, Michael. If you're going to be in a high pressure disease area, you put a cheap fungicide out, 5 or 6 leaves, and then just at the button stage when the flower is about to appear, you put on a strobiluron and away you go. That's it,
Actually, just outside Oak Park this year, we had a farmer next door had sunflowers. Now, it wasn't necessarily for combining; it was for, I suppose, almost like a tourist trap in terms of selling it and that. But in fairness, they grew reasonably well. Now, I suppose the only thing, and I might ask you about the herbicides, is that the variety, I don't think there's a herbicide cleared for use in Ireland, just as it happens, because it's not really a crop. But what sort of herbicides do you use across on your crops?
There's basically 2 types available. That you can spray with a Mazamox, okay, but we're growing all express, which you can spray with tribenuron methyl, because it's the Mazamox really has an accumulative effect in the land. It's very hard in the subsequent wheat crops, and because we're moving more and more to no-till, with mesometrione and maize and a Mazamox in sunflower, we've taken out, and so we're growing so
they're ALS tolerant crops, basically.
Yeah.
Very good.
And
so sulfonylureas, I suppose, for people listening.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
the
exactly.
likes of your
and it's easier.
Your Tibenuron is Cameo, I think, is it, or is it Harmony? I can't remember which, but yeah, fair enough. Okay.
Like that. And then the other thing, Michael, that the sunflowers, we've moved everything to 500 millimeter, 20-inch rows. They like that. They like to be evenly spaced. So we've even cut back our seeding rate. All the books tell you here 60,000. We've cut back to 55,000 plants this year.
Okay.
I would think in Ireland you would go back to 50,000 to let the air in around them and keep them healthy and not dense. If you have to put some nitrogen on it, it's to use liquid UAN as late as you can travel. You just keep the nutrition away from them. Their biggest enemy is a big, lush, early growth. It's simply their biggest enemy.
Just in terms of, you mentioned organic a little bit earlier there as regards that you have, I can't remember what figure you said, but I think you have a good bit of organic in 500 hectares of organic soya, I think you said.
Yeah, exactly. We grow 1,800 hectares. One of our companies, Multi-Agri, in one area is an organic farm, and we have 1,800 hectares. But we have a big question mark over it, Michael, because of the soil degradation from the continuous hoeing. Sure. I mean, we have 4 hoes going night and day now, trying to keep down the weeds, and that's fine until we get a big thunder downpour, something in the soil washed all over the place, and our phosphorus levels are being decimated, and our weed bank is building up.
The other question I suppose I had was, given the cost of grain at the moment, or food, I suppose, in particular at the moment, have you noticed any difference in terms of demand for some of the organic produce, or is it that a little bit early along this change?
No, because we would be selling organic stuff kind of from February on, selling it forward. In COVID, there was quite a surge in demand for organic because people couldn't go out to dine, so they shopped more for organic. They said, okay, we'll treat ourselves to some organic produce. Now with prices increasing, that has ceased. For instance, we grow a lot of spelt wheat, and we have Naturland registry from Germany. But we've been told that as of December 31st this year, we will no longer get Naturland registration for our spelt wheat, because there would be enough spelt wheat in Germany grown organically. So okay. It would be inorganic. And this is the nonsense that goes on in the whole organic world. There's about 6 different agencies. We're accredited for BioSwiss, Naturland, Austrian Bio, Bioland, BioHof, one after another, and the Americans have another system, all with different rules, all with different interpretations. But the guys who mainly buy our soybean are now running around everywhere trying to buy soybean. There's a big surge in organic soybean prices because there was quite a lot produced in the Ukraine, which is not available. So now they're off in dearly beloved Africa trying to source organic soybean from Africa. That's really environmentally friendly hauling, right? The other thing, Michael, that the organic soybean was on a roll anyway, because the northern countries, Denmark and Sweden, and particularly Sweden, had said to their dairy farmers, you have until 2024-25 to source your protein for your animal feed in Europe. Because believe it or not, the main source of organic soybean meal in Europe is from China.
Okay, didn't know that.
Well, there you go. And it comes from Africa to China. It lands on the dock, and through some magical process, it becomes organic soybean.
I can sense a bit of cynicism there, Jim, so I can.
Well, this is exactly the point I'm making. So the Swedish government and the Danish government said, guys, it's over now, because they'll just see so much nonsense with the samples they're testing, and they have to source their thing. I mean, one of the biggest soybean buyers in organic, I had a meeting with him in May last year, and he said to me, by mid-20s, organic soybean meal will be €1,000 a ton, let alone the soybean, trying to keep me in the production, because growing organic soybeans isn't easy, Michael. Trying to, as you well know, growing beans in Ireland, trying to keep the weeds out of them We try and grow organic soybeans, and we grow a lot of linseed as well. Try to keep the weeds out. It's a nightmare.
I would think, I suppose, on the other side of it, given the fact that unless it's going into human diets, that if that's going into an animal diet, I kind of think that's going to become uneconomic for anybody to grow to even feed it, never mind grow it. Being a different.
Well, Michael, for the average person, food inflation is a very serious issue at the moment. It is a very serious, and this problem isn't going away anytime soon, Michael, because we're depending on that fertilizer, nitrogen. The environmental lobby just failed to realize without artificial nitrogen, we will struggle to feed 4 billion people on this planet. We now have almost 8. So you can forget about this fallacy that we can farm the world organically and feed the world. We can't. Organic farming is beautiful for rich people. It's beautiful. But if you're like here, if you're an elderly couple living here in northeast Romania, and you'll have 250 euros a month pension with the same energy costs as in Ireland, food inflation is very different if you're living in Berlin and have a very smart job at an IT company. And food inflation, Michael, is a serious issue.
No,
and
for
it's
sure.
going to be just fertilizer, Michael. If we take out the Ukraine war and the Russian war, before that happened, fertilizer was a huge issue. The issue wasn't price, Michael. The issue was supply.
Yeah.
And that supply issue has only got worse.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Because, nitrogen is ammonia, and the cost of gas at the moment, and what's happening in the Ukraine from people I speak to there, and what's happening here, is we're all moving away from high demand nitrogen crops.
It's and that to a degree is the high demand ones, the likes of maize, as you were saying before, they produce the big yields, the big tons.
Yeah, and
that's the big energy, I suppose, really, to a degree.
Yeah, and wheat, Michael, you can't get protein in your wheat without a certain level of nitrogen. After all, what is protein? And so, we're already preparing ourselves for low proteins in our wheat,
which feeds into the price, I suppose, in terms of the quality wheat. Everyone's looking for the 13-14% quality wheat, so it all feeds in. It's a vicious circle, this almost, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, Mike. And so I think the thing that the farmer listeners, is not wanting to scare people, but I would say to anybody, go and get yourself some good leguminous cover crops. The minute you harvest, I'd be trying to grow as much of my own nitrogen as possible. And I would, to go stop plowing and go to mint hill, preserve what you've got, because this is a problem that's going to be with us for a while. This is going to be a problem that's going to be with us for a while, and so we got to grow more of our own nitrogen, and we've got to start sourcing it and supply and demand. And have no doubt, Michael, there's been some eye gouging with fertilizer pricing. That's human nature,
Sure.
There's the big price going in your stocks when you'll wait for the big price. But we were trying to buy. We'll start seeding about the 10th of August, seeding rape, and we've been trying to source DAP for that, and our importer and supplier, they've got 6,000 ton consignment of DAP coming in, but they're quoting 1,180 euros a ton.
Ouch.
And I think I really don't think we have any choice but suck it up and see.
Suck it up and see where you go, yeah. And maybe we might finish off, if we can, on maybe a positive note. In terms of the grain markets, Jim, where do you see those going? Certainly not going back, but have we reached nearly the heights of it, or do you think it'll go further?
Feed wheat competes with grain maize, and feed wheat competes, which is one of the big crops at home, and barley. Oh, very strong prices, very, very strong prices, because the supply won't be there because of the war, and because of it won't be a spectacularly good harvest in this part of the world, and it's all exported. It goes down into the Middle East and it goes up into Northern Europe, and it just won't be there. The tons won't be there. So it's if you can manage your fertilizer, and if you've built up your fertility over the years, you can pull back a bit now and use a bit more judiciously in your peas, and maybe not so much your Ks, maybe more straw chopping. But there's a few good years ahead for tillage farmers because of high prices, because, we've good prices paper over a lot of cracks. And if we can maintain the good yields, and crops look very good at home this spring. So, it's onwards and upwards, but we've got to be really cognizant that fertilizer is going to be an issue and it's not going away. And you need to send your merchant a nice present and say, here, I'm your newest best friend, and we need to do a deal, and you need to guarantee me supply. And that's the thing, is guarantee of supply.
Guarantee supply, yeah. Well, look, I mean, that's a great positive note to finish on. I suppose too that there's lots of positivity in for tillage farmers for the future. And I think your other message there you had at the end is try and grow your own or as much of your own nitrogen as you can with some of these leguminous cover crops. I think it's probably a good thing to be thrown in if you can as well.
Oh, absolutely. Because winter barley should all be cover crop with as much legumes as we can. And the other thing, Michael, I would say to people, there's huge results from treating this. If you're putting peas and different vetches and that into your cover crop mix, you would be very well paid for using an inoculant. The amount of nodulation you'll get. We use a very cheap inoculant here for the soybean. And if you use that on your legumes, you'll get a huge increase in nitrogen fixation and nodulation. Huge. And it will pay you very, very well at the present price for nitrogen. That's
certainly one for everyone to look into as well. Jim, you're very good. You're always a mind of information. It's brilliant to have somebody, I suppose, the correspondent from Romania or the Eastern Europe. I think it's brilliant to get your insights every time we're chatting to you. And look, thank you very much again. And hopefully we'll touch base again maybe through the middle of December to see how you're getting on.
Great. Mike, thank you.
So that's all we've time for. And my thanks to Jim for joining me today on the podcast. As always, if you have a suggestion or topic you'd like to hear more about, drop me an email at michael.hennessy@teagasc.ie or on Twitter @teagascross. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed this podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.